In 2004, the first Batman cartoon to follow the seminal Batman the Animated Series, The Batman, was released, and the creative team had an unenviable task ahead of them. BTAS had done a lot to redefine Batman's villains, and even introduced a few characters that had never appeared outside of the comics before. So to say that it was a hard act to follow might be an understatement. Rather than just trying to do the same thing over again, the Batman's writers decided to do their own thing. A good example of this is their version of the Ventriloquist and Scarface. While on the surface they are pretty similar to what had come before, this version of the characters leaned more heavily on the comedic side. And it was pretty effective. Before getting to that, let's talk about the versions of the Ventriloquist and Scarface that had come before. I had previously talked about their origins in depth when covering the BTAS versions of the character, so if you want to hear more information, add that video to your watch later list. I've included a link in this video's description and the info button in the top right corner. The Ventriloquist and Scarface made their debut in 1987's Detective Comics 583. Operating out of a nightclub, the Ventriloquist and Scarface are the force behind the new drug fever, which is causing all sorts of chaos in Gotham. Everyone underestimates the pair, thinking that the ventriloquist is the brains of the outfit, but in reality he's mentally unwell, with his alternate personality manifesting itself through the dummy Scarface. It's much later revealed that the ventriloquist is named Arnold Wesker, a troubled man who had been deeply traumatized by his parents' death in a hit and run. Witnessing his parents be flattened by the car as a child caused him to mentally retreat and bottle his emotions up. Eventually, every negative aspect of his personality, his anger and his powerlessness, was channeled through Scarface, the criminal mastermind, while he acts as the meek assistant. There is some question as to whether Wesker is genuinely mentally unwell or if Scarface possesses Wesker, or maybe even a mix of the two. It is alleged that Scarface had been carved from the wood of the Hangman's Tree at Blackgate Prison, and the souls of the executed criminals live within the dummy. While there was some ambiguity in the comic books, his first adaptation in Batman the Animated Series was more definitive. There, Arnold Wesker was a deeply unwell man. While there was some humour to be found in seeing this meek little man holding a sociopathic gangster dummy, Wesker was one of the most tragic figures in Batman the Animated Series. He was genuinely unwell and completely separate from Scarface. Every time Scarface was destroyed, it broke Wesker's heart. However, by the time of the new Batman adventures, Wesker was able to reform, despite the best efforts of his former henchmen Muggsy and Rhino. While Wesker did briefly relapse, he ultimately rejected Scarface and wanted to live a normal life. Well, as normal as someone like him could. He was a rare example of a villain getting a happy ending, even if some of the tie-in comics had him accidentally returning to crime. Still, the desire was there, and that's the most important thing. Note also that in the time of Batman Beyond, we can see the Scarface puppet safely locked away in the Batcave. When it came time for the Batman to adapt the Ventriloquist and Scarface, they went with a more comedic take on the character, leaning into his absurdity quite effectively. The Batman's ventriloquist is a former child's entertainer who fell on hard times and whose mind split. He had been the head puppeteer behind the popular show Cockamamie Junction, and when the show was cancelled he decided to develop a new character, Scarface. When he took his new show on tour, it was met with loud boos, causing Wesker to flee off stage. He and Scarface returned later that night to rob the audience, and one of Gotham's newest crime bosses was born. One thing I like about this version's design is that he's less of a classic 1950s Al Capone style gangster and more of a 1980s Al Pacino as Scarface, Tony Montana. They even make several references to Pacino's movies, having Scarface bellow, "Say hello to my little friend," or accusing Wesker of betraying him and quoting Pacino in The Godfather Part 2 saying, "I knew it was you, Arnie. You broke my heart. You broke my heart." And that's not the only comedic element. A running joke about them pulling off one more big heist before retiring as ranchers in Texas or Montana plays up the absurdity of the concept more than anything else. In his first appearance, Wesker and Scarface steal machinery and computer chips to allow Wesker to build a giant mechanical version of Scarface that can hold Wesker in its hand and use it to rob the bank. This reflects Wesker's view that he is the puppet and that Scarface is the one pulling the strings. Scarface reveals that this job is the first of many, betraying Wesker and his dream of retirement, who thought it was a one and done. There's a parallel plot about Bruce Wayne trying online dating after Alfred notes that it's time for him to start settling down and let a special someone into his life. The kind of woman he had been going on dates with weren't serious relationships. They were all part of his playboy billionaire facade. He matches with a psychologist named Becky. However, Batman worries about sharing his own dominant personality, Batman, and ultimately sends Alfred to let the woman down gently. And that's the parallel the show makes between Batman and Scarface. They both have their alternate personalities, and one is more dominant than the other. Wesker's most significant appearance comes in the episode of Fistful of Felt, in which he undergoes rigorous treatment in Arkham to break his connection to Scarface. Professor Hugo Strange, the head of Arkham, has Scarface forcibly removed and pairs Wesker with a new puppet, Mr. Snoots. After months of treatment, Wesker is given a clean bill of mental health, resumes his career as a children's entertainer, and is invited to perform at the grand opening of one of Bruce Wayne's new projects. However, Hugo Strange could not be trusted. While he is correct in saying that Wesker is harmless so long as he's kept separate from Scarface, Strange deliberately reinserted Scarface into Wesker's life. This was done in the name of studying the criminal psyche, with no thought given to the damage he had done to Wesker's life. This runs parallel to Batman's insistence on inserting himself into Wesker's life too. He follows Wesker on his first day of release from Arkham, convinced that he's about to commit a robbery when he was really just working a birthday party as an entertainer. Batman also invites Wesker to perform at his opening, where some valuable sports memorabilia is due to be auctioned, something that he suspects will tempt Wesker into returning to Scarface, and he does it anyway. It's abundantly clear that Wesker is not well mentally, but his alternate personality of Mr. Snoots is harmless, so people tolerate his peculiarities. The lack of care that is shown towards him is frankly staggering. He was on the path to becoming harmless, but people insisted on interfering in his life, which led to the return of Scarface. Having said that, there is some comedy to be found in the scene where Wesker returns home after going grocery shopping, to find Mr. Snoots stuffed in the refrigerator with one of his eyes missing, as Scarface sits menacingly in the corner. It evokes memories of Green Lantern Kyle Rayner returning home to find his murdered girlfriend Alexandra stuffed in the fridge, coining the term fridging. But in this case, it's a felt puppet, and it is gloriously absurd. As is Scarface's disguise at the gala, where he effectively wears Mr. Snoots' skin. His gang hides out in the old TV studio where Wesker's TV series was filmed, and Scarface plans to kill Wesker for ratting them out to Batman, using a mechanized train character from the show, Choo Choo Chucky, to flatten him. Wesker attempts to break free, getting as far as working a hand loose, but Scarface orders him to stop resisting, and he does. The real rat, of course, was not Wesker, it was Mr. Snoots, and the two puppets battle for Wesker's soul. This evokes memories of the Ventriloquist's fate during the Nightfall comics, where Scarface comes into conflict with another puppet, Socko, which results in the ventriloquist getting shot. Or the more tragic DCAU story in the Batman Adventures Annual 1, where Wesker's friend Croaky the puppet is murdered by Scarface for ratting them out. But in this case, both Scarface and Mr. Snoots are flattened by the train. Batman is able to save Wesker at the last moment, leaving him to eulogize his special friend. It's unclear which puppet he was referring to, but Batman notes that if he's talking about Mr. Snoots, then there's hope for him yet. Sadly, Wesker later returned with Scarface, but only ever in a supporting role. He and Scarface were locked up by rumour, and the pair joined the Joker, Penguin and Killer Croc to commit a robbery at the behest of Wrath, the anti-Batman. The Ventriloquist and Scarface may have started as a comedic reimagining of their darker predecessors, but they are one of the show's most memorable duos. While the original incarnation of Wesker was a deeply disturbed man struggling with his mental illness, the Batman gave him a more absurd and farcical backstory, yet still kept the core of the character intact. The dynamic between Wesker and Scarface, though presented through a more humorous lens, never lost its tragic undertones, and the series skillfully explored how someone like Wesker could be manipulated and controlled by his own creations, as well as some other people. Ultimately, what makes the Batman's Ventriloquist and Scarface stand out is their balance of comedy and pathos. The show didn't shy away from the fact that despite the ridiculousness of a man taking orders from a puppet, there was a deep sadness at the heart of their relationship. Wesker's desire to entertain, his battle with his alternate personality, and the fact that he was never able to truly reform adds a layer to the character that is rarely seen elsewhere. In the end, the Batman's version of the ventriloquist may have leaned into comedy, but in many ways, his story was just as compelling as the more tragic versions. Okay, that's it for this week's essay. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really enjoyed the video and have the means, please consider making use of the thanks button to send a buck or two my way, because every little helps. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month. This will get you early access to my weekly video essay, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, custom emojis, and an icon on your profile indicating that you're one of my people. And special thanks to my current channel members, who are all listed on the screen right now. Next time, I'll be back on Friday and we'll return to the futuristic world of Neo Gotham to talk about Xander, the genetically modified supreme leader of Cobra. Then next Monday, it's time to talk about another beloved figure from the recent Creature Commando series. We're going to say cheers to the Tin Man and talk about G.I. Robot and his endless quest to rid the world of Nazis. Hope to see you then.